Welcome to Revenue Impact, the podcast show where we don't hold back. Joining Kunal today is Samantha Thompson, founder of the Enablr.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. And today we have Samantha Thompson with us. Samantha, please, could you introduce yourself to us?
Of course. Thank you for having me. My name is Samantha Thompson. I founded the Enablr. I've been doing this for about 10 years now and have been loving it the whole time.
Amazing. So today we are here to talk about, in a very unscripted fashion, almost unprepared, about enablement experience and background and context. Specifically, the question that is being asked is, do you need a sales background in order to be an effective enabler? Now, I think this conversation, this talk track was triggered based on, I think it was a LinkedIn post, right? What sparked it?
I think I was posting exactly about this, and you happen to have a few very, very good replies. And I guess we should link that post when we load this. And I loved your perspective because I think we both agree, not necessarily, but there are a lot of caveats that I think we'll dig into later. And as soon as we had that thread going, it was reply after reply. And I was like, well, there's something here. I think you and I need to get on a call and talk through this.
Yeah, 100%. And I've had this conversation a few times, and I'm sure you have as well, right? In the past with various other people.
And in interviews, I mean, it comes up constantly. And I think what you're also will acknowledge too is rarely do enablers or even enablement leaders control this narrative. And I hope that this conversation now will be the beginning of enablement starting to guide this conversation more as opposed to other functions doing that for us.
That's the intent. Absolutely. I've actually been rejected for a position a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I didn't have enough sales experience. I have some, right? But not enough. That's an odd one. But tell me about your own path. So let's talk about kind of how you got into enablement. Which direction did you come from?
Absolutely. I mean, I came from the direction of, I had a bachelor's and a master's in history. I was down in North Carolina and I threw all my belongings in my car. I drove up to Boston. I didn't have a job. I didn't have an apartment. I remember dropping my father off at the airport, crying in the rain, saying, I don't know if I have what it takes to do this. And, hit the pavement, quite literally. I was all over the city applying to, I think at the time, I want to say it was 128 jobs because I do track this in an Excel sheet, and that's me geeking out in a different way for another time. And I happened to get two offers. One was from a prestigious law school within Boston to go do administration there. And the other phone call that I quite literally got within 30 minutes of that same one was to join a small tech startup that was very literally in a converted garage in South Boston. And for anyone who is familiar with southie, you know that is a tough space to work in the summer. We were melting. Ooh. But I didn't look back. And that was the beginning of enablement for me. At the time, it was called, a sales administrator. And I did anything and everything under the sun. I was quite literally running phone lines across the ceiling. I was installing an air conditioner, so again, we wouldn't melt. I was, onboarding and coaching folks. I was cleaning our Salesforce instance line by line because it was first implemented by an extremely well-intentioned AE. Anyone in operations will probably shudder to hear that. And not long after that role, I saw a job posting for something called sales enablement. And I was like, what on earth is this? And as I read the JD, I was like, oh, this is all the really fun stuff that I do day to day. You mean to tell me this is a career? I'm in. And I made that shift, haven't looked back, and have been loving the journey ever since.
So effectively what you're saying is you haven't technically sold.
I have never carried a bag.
Right.
And I have nothing against it. I don't think I'm too good for it. It just isn't how the job market opened up for me.
Yeah.
I even remember asking my first manager in my final interview, because I am highly introverted. That doesn't always come across, especially in settings like this. And I asked her point blank, sitting at a Starbucks in Southie, I said, will I need to make cold calls to do this job? Like, will I also be selling? And she said, no, I actually did end up selling in some different ways, like helping folks, drive signups, tabling and things like that. But again, very, very different and things I was used to doing from academia. But no, I have never directly carried a bag and I have never misrepresented that. I could see myself doing it in the future, though. I've applied and been open to those things throughout my career, but I keep getting scooped up to build enablement functions, again, despite not having held a bag.
We all get scooped up in some way, don't we?
Yep.
It's kind of I don't know if it's one of those professions that we choose from the outset. Maybe more so now, but think about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, perhaps. It's not one of those professions where we say, oh, I want to be an enablement, right? We somehow get scooped into
I
it.
had no clue. Yeah.
Right, same, exactly here. It just turned out that the role that you were doing, or even I was doing back in those days, happened to be that of what is defined as enablement now. So that's really interesting, your background there, and you know, is it really a startup if you're not in a garage, right?
Exactly.
Do you think your background, right? So as you kind of progressed in your enablement career to date, right? Do you think your background gave you an advantage, or do you think it created some blind spots for you?
I would say probably both. And what I mean by that is the degrees that I got required me, even as an undergraduate, to read one book per class per week and write a paper on it and then present that paper. So I was used to taking in, very deep and sometimes philosophical, highly political topics, synthesizing a lot of that information and then regurgitating it to educate classmates. And again, writing lengthy papers. And so I needed to be a self-guided learner. And I originally had the plan of, going to get a PhD in history. And I decided my masochism did in fact have limits, and that was not going to be for me. But when I made it my mission, when I got, again, that very, very first sales administrator job, completely just you walk in, you have the job type deal, no experience required. I made it my mission to get what I, jokingly call a PhD in sales. I made a point to read everything I could get my hands on. I joined every webinar, listened to whatever podcast was out there. I was going to conferences even at that time. I made it my job to fill the gap that I knew was there, which was I haven't directly sold before. And if I'm supposed to help folks, I can't help people if I don't understand what their day-to-day is. And that understanding helped me build something I talk about often, which is having a lot of empathy and compassion for the folks that you enable. And then, of course, I think, I've carried that through and I still have that mindset. I'm always reading anything and everything I can get my hands on. I don't believe that it's possible to master some disciplines, sales and enablement being two of those, because they are constantly evolving. So I'd say, if I have a blind spot, it could be just because, again, I haven't fully lived that day to day. But again, I make it my job to chip away at that in any meaningful way that I can by, again, always learning, always being open to getting feedback, always open to even taking harsh criticism if that's what it requires. Because my other background, too, is I've been a competitive athlete since I was 6 years old. I have, walked on to a D1 rowing team. I, ran, I, showed horses, I swam, I picked up surfing for fun. Like I am used to getting tough feedback. And so I take that all in stride. And that's part of my approach to enablement is continuous education, continuous improvement.
That's really interesting. I mean, a couple of things there. So, I saw this really interesting article today on LinkedIn. I can't remember who it was, but I'll try and find a link to it. And the headline was around salespeople are not created, they're born, meaning you either have it or you don't, kind of thing, and then you refine it from there. And you mentioning your kind of competitive background, since you're very young, kind of ties into that a little bit, right? You've always been wanting to progress, to win, to achieve, right? And maybe that has been absolutely helpful with that, maybe even subconsciously for a lot of people, right?
I would hope so. And I think that's also a reason why typically, not in every sales org, but typically why I can find common ground with a lot of sellers is, I mean, you know this too, right? The best sellers are highly competitive, typically with themselves, sometimes with others, and just wanting to, again, pursue greatness and, hey, make some good money while you're doing it. I think finding those commonalities has been helpful for me because when I meet reps who are super driven and who think that way, I'm like, oh, I get it. So how can I help you do that more effectively? Even if it isn't, again, like me perfecting my rowing stroke, I can still apply that knowledge to sales.
Right. You also said something interesting there as well, which was how can you help the sellers if you haven't kind of walked in the shoes of, maybe I'm paraphrasing slightly there. But Samantha, is that you saying if you don't have sales experience, you cannot be an effective enabler?
Never. No.
Okay.
Not in the slightest. I've had that told to me though, and I may be similar to you when I've interviewed. I've had companies say along lines, oh, you clearly understand enablement, you have good outcomes, what have you, but because you haven't carried a bag, you can't do this role. And it's like, well, I'm looking at the JD and I've done everything in the JD and I've done it at a very high level. So
Yeah.
agree to disagree. But again, if that's the philosophy, not going to be a fit for me as an organization regardless. And I would argue you're not going to hire the best talent that you necessarily could for the role because
Right.
you eliminate plenty of folks.
Yeah, 100%. So that kind of brings me on to the difference between sales experience, right?
Mhm.
And sales acumen. Sales acumen you've acquired, right?
Right.
Through studying it, through the learning you've done, and all of that. What do you think is the difference, the key difference between the two, acumen versus experience? And how does it
You could
impact
argue
the
it's
role?
skin in the game, right? If you, because acumen, you're learning it, and my skin in the game in that sense is I want to retain my job and do well and be the best enabler that I can.
Yeah,
But in terms of, right, the skill from the lived experience, it's different. You had to build that because if you didn't, you wouldn't retain your job. So I think that's the big difference is the type of skin you have in the game. And
mm,
for enablement too, I mean, we see plenty of folks that even though we have the acumen, we if we're not driving revenue outcomes, which again, separate conversation for a different day on how you measure enablement, because that's how you get around that. You can also find yourself in a tough spot because I would argue that's a lack of enablement acumen that some people have.
right. And that's the other part of the acumen, right? Which is, I guess when you think about the history of enablement and how it was formed and the background of a lot of people within it, it's kind of one of those two, perhaps other backgrounds as well, marketing could be their ops. But generally, it's either you come from a sales background or you come from like an L&D training type background, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the same debate can be for the other context, right? Which is if you come from, or if you do not come from the L&D training background, then how do you actually enable? How do you understand adult learning behavior patterns,
Mhm.
trends? How do you implement that? How do you manage the program, deliver it all? We've all seen those charts around what enablement actually does
Right.
versus what people think it does. And like, it's always
Mhm.
lots of colors in a pie chart. Um, you don't get all of that from just selling, right?
And I think that's what people forget. And there's I mentioned it to you previously, and I'll say it here on the record. I've never done this before. There is a pervasive and dangerous mindset that I've observed in my 10 years in enablement that those who can't sell can enable. I've seen that time and time again. I have seen that in people who I've interviewed. I've seen that when I've been at conferences talking to folks, and it's simply not true. You can be the greatest seller in the world and have fantastic outcomes. Doesn't mean you can enable your way out of a paper bag, period.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is sales is one of the only professions that I have observed time and time again that the second someone becomes an AE, they believe they've learned it all. That doesn't hold true in any other profession worth its salt. We do not see that with professional athletes, right? LeBron is still out there, making shots at practice every single day. Doctors and nurses still have continuous education. Lawyers are required to do the same. Again, scientists are also learning and staying on top of cutting edge technology with requirements. Why should sales be any different?
Mm.
And it also, again, applies to enablement. So if you're coming with a sales background, doesn't mean you know anything about adult learning or strategic thinking or cross department collaboration or any of the other 15 skills that
Mm.
you may need, right, to fill out that colorful pie chart that I think you and I are referring to the same one that we saw on LinkedIn recently, right? Those sales skills, you can argue that's the tip of the iceberg, which again, fantastic to have, but you're missing 90 something percent of what will make you successful in enablement if you don't make it your job to learn those things.
And that's the key. How do you learn those things, right? So, um, I guess if I speak about personal experience, it was quite literally self-taught, right? Similar to what you've done, done the various courses, training. There's a lot of things out there, but it is about motivating yourself to actually learn on the job, right? While you're
Yep.
doing it, especially if you're new to enablement, right? And there are a lot of people listening to this who are new to enablement or fairly new to enablement,
Mhm.
who come from one of those two backgrounds, sales or sort of training L&D. So in your view, based on kind of those learnings, those attributes that you can acquire, right? Acumen essentially. What do you think are the most critical skills that enablement needs today? And of those, kind of,
Mhm.
can you map it to one of those areas? So if you're coming from sales, then you're going to have this, and that's a critical skill. If you're coming from the training L&D background, that's a critical skill.
Okay. Let me see if I can
Yeah,
map this then. So if you, to your point, if you're coming from sales, you will probably have a good understanding of some of the core methodologies and qualification frameworks.
right.
You will have probably a good understanding of what a negotiation and procurement cycle is like and how to avoid some of those pitfalls. You probably are adept at sales tooling and comfortable talking to folks that you've never spoken to before, right? All very important things that would also serve you in enablement.
Hmm.
I think if you are coming from more of an L&D background, I think there is a rigor and a discipline to how you look at your day to day that will serve you incredibly well within enablement. Understanding adult learning is key, right? Because how we learn as children needs to change as adults. I think there will be aspects of communication and cross functional collaboration that those folks will have as well. And then I've seen folks do this too. I don't know if you have as well, but I also was technically in operations for like the first 5 years, even though I was doing enablement. And I think being comfortable and acknowledging that everything you do should be tied to revenue outcomes, whether it's a project, training, what have you, and being comfortable measuring those things will serve you incredibly well in enablement, because that's one of the biggest gaps that I've identified for our profession. How did I do with that? What I miss?
I think you've caught most of it. Obviously, the thing that's close to my heart is around data analysis,
Mhm.
metrics, strategic thinking, and kind of executive relationship management, perhaps as well,
Yes,
and
that is
communication.
most of my job is communicating with executives, which if someone had told me that when I was starting in enablement, wouldn't have believed you. That is a lot of my job is change management and
Hmm.
being comfortable talking to execs.
So it kind of it's kind of turning out that look, there's super valuable skills and experiences that you can gain whichever direction you're coming from into enablement. But it sounds like a lot of those core critical skills and kind of just putting it all together are gained from doing the job, right?
Mhm.
Yes, through learning and acquiring that knowledge and acumen. The experience certainly helps, um, but it comes from doing the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't just show up and be a great enabler. I certainly wasn't when I was
Right.
starting out, right? I had to
Neither was I.
learn what it meant to be a good coach, a good trainer, how folks would want to engage with content, when content would actually be helpful for them, what they would want out of attending a revenue kickoff. And I think, again, there's just this misunderstanding and arrogance of, oh, well, I carried a bag for a few years. I'm tired of doing that. I can just go show up in enablement and be fine.
Yeah.
I've had other people too who I've talked to a lot of people in the past 6 months from all walks of life. And there's even some that have been educators who are saying, well, I just want to go do enablement. And my first question to anyone, whatever background is, well, what have you done to learn about enablement?
Hmm.
And oftentimes it's nothing. And I would argue the single biggest skill to be successful in enablement, you must be a self-guided learner and you must be intellectually curious, right? Because we just outlined any number of separate disciplines that could be their own
Right.
job.
Right.
Enablement's a mix of any given day, 15, 20 separate skills that you need to leverage.
Yeah.
It's not just training.
That I think that is the key point. I think you have to be a disciplined self-learner,
Mhm.
and acquire of that knowledge through whatever means and methods it takes. When I think back to my own career, yes, that I mean it's kind of clicking now. That is exactly what I have done um, over the last 15 years or so. Attending the events, attending the webinars, speaking on them as well,
Mhm.
networking, reading, learning the courses, the articles, the posts, all of that. I think we're quite lucky now. There's a lot of people out there who are building that content continuously, a lot of it for free as well, that is consumable. Um, and including yourself, right? Based on
Mhm.
the posts and articles and the content that you're generating, it's certainly there to help people who are newer to the field. So there's obviously downsides as well, right? Um, if you're a new enabler listening to this, right, and you've come from, let's say, the L&D training background, um, what do you think is the biggest kind of area that someone may struggle initially?
Mhm.
What do you think they need to kind of crack first?
Yeah, and I would say this is anyone who's coming, right? It could be product marketing, it can be operations, really anything that hasn't been carrying a bag. I would say you really need to shadow your sellers. You need to understand how tough their job is. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I opened or my eyes were open to in my first few years, even in operations when I was in that blended role, was salespeople were often told, shut up and do it. We don't care what you think. You were here, tied to these sometimes, frankly, unreasonable goals for the company. They have so much pressure on them. They are often, thrown around and having organizational whiplash from the C-suite on what they need to focus on, how they should sell, changing terms, how we're going to only do multi-year this year, and then you need to have, 2 products in every deal. Just the rate of change and how folks talk to sales teams and sales leaders was eye-opening. So if you're going to do anything coming from a non-sales background, make it your mission to understand just how hard their day-to-day is. Because I have worked with cross-functionals within marketing functions who have told me and my sellers to our faces, we think our sales team is stupid. That is a direct quote. I heard that a number of times. That could not be further from the truth. And then a lot of those folks are the ones who want to go be in enablement. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I know who pays my bills. I know who, enjoys my programs and gives me great feedback and helps me be better at my job. It's the sales team. I have never had that thought, and I couldn't imagine having that thought. So if you can't have compassion, empathy, and respect
Yeah.
for the, for roles that you're meant to be helping, you have no business being an enablement. Go do something else.
That's such a critical point. Empathy, right? It's not a them and us situation where
No.
we are the same team. They're like you said, they're the ones who are paying the bills, right?
Right.
Essentially. Which brings me into my kind of next point, which is around working with sales teams, right? Especially if you do not have the sales background, and you don't have naturally that empathy. You can learn it, you can acquire, you can work and sit with salespeople and get to know them to get that information. But what about credibility, right? So it goes 2 ways, right? Like you said, you had a prospective enabler saying our sales teams are stupid, right? But what about the other way around? Like that enabler doesn't know what they're talking about. They have never sold. How do you build that credibility? How do you get over that hurdle?
I think the answer may be unsatisfying. It's going to be time. It'll be the things that you've delivered and seeing, did they actually do what they were intended to do? Did they have a positive impact on revenue or folks' competencies? Were they able to do things, differently or better than they were able to before? I really do believe it is just time and being adaptable and flexible and being open to that feedback. Because if you appear to be a closed system, you are creating and launching programs without ever having talked to a sales leader or a sales team, not really sure why you're doing enablement. And that's, again, one of the best ways to build credibility is to have folks understand what is being asked of you as the enabler, looking at the organizational goals, seeing how they're performing, tying in both the qualitative and quantitative feedback, and explaining what you're going to do and why, and then delivering the thing. That to me has been, I think, the biggest way I've done it, because otherwise you're just someone who showed up to do a function. There's no other way, in my opinion, to build credibility. It's results and it's time.
The last word you said there was results. I think speaking from personal experience, I probably struggled a little bit when it came to kind of building that credibility. But when the results started to show, and when you were able to tell a story around those results and around how kind of we started and how the journey that got us there to that point, that is the one, that silver bullet almost, right? That obtain that credibility. Results. And it comes from all of the things we've just been talking about, doing the right things at the right time in the right way. That's been really useful, I think, not just for me personally, but I think for a lot of our listeners out there who are either fairly new to enablement, looking to become an enabler, or even experienced pros, right, who have these backgrounds, what we can do more of. If you could kind of go back in your career, and on day one of your enablement career, or even before it was enablement, right? What would you say to yourself? What was that piece of advice you'd give to yourself that could help you personally accelerate the last 10 years?
Honest answer is, if I could go back right now, I would go take a job as a BDR. I'm dead serious. But the thing is, though, I think I would have ended up loving sales if I had done it sooner. Because again, all I do now is talk to people I don't know on the phone every day. Like, I would have been fine. But again, I was like 23 years old. I had not a clue. So I would actually go back and just go carry a bag. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think I ever would have come to enablement because I would think I would have had such a good time. Would have been very hard, but I love a challenge and I enjoy the grind. I think I would have loved sales, and you would not have the enabler. Let's put it that way.
That would be a shame. But it's kind of like a drug, isn't it?
Mhm.
You can get hooked on it. But I do wonder how many great enablers there are out there who are carrying a bag today, right? Selling. But look, I mean that's been super enlightening. Really useful for a lot of people out there who are listening to this. Samantha, any final closing words of advice you would give to people?
Final words. I think it depends on the way in which you're approaching it. If you want to join enablement, first and foremost, regardless of your background, the profession can benefit from you. But I do think, again, whether you come from sales or, you're coming from L&D operations, what have you, just be honest about where your gaps are. Make a point to be a self-guided learner. No one expects you to be perfect and have it figured out day one. But if you come in with arrogance, which is a term we didn't use, but I think we were talking around, assuming you have it all figured out because you did whatever it was in your past role, that's not going to serve you. I think enablement is a profession where the ego will be beat out of you whether or not you want it to be. It will force you to be humble because just when you think you have it figured out, something will change in the market and enablement is getting reworked again. So I think that's my biggest advice. Be a self-guided learner, be open to the process. Again, been doing this for 10 years. I don't think I'm anywhere near perfect. That would be boring if I was. So yeah, enjoy the journey and connect with your community. We're here to help you.
We're all students, right? Regardless of experience,
Absolutely.
time, we are all students of this game. So amazing. Samantha, thank you so much for giving us your time and your experience and wisdom. Follow Samantha on LinkedIn to follow her posts and follow the Enabler as well, right? Who are delivering a bunch of quality content out there. So thank you so much again, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.